Around noon on what historians believe was October 24th in the year 79 AD, a Roman naval commander named Pliny the Elder was enjoying lunch at his villa in Misenum, across the Bay of Naples. His sister pointed to the sky. "Uncle, look." A massive cloud was rising above Mount Vesuvius, shaped like an umbrella pine tree, reaching miles into the sky. It was darker than any storm cloud, and it was growing. Pliny the Elder ordered his ships prepared. As admiral of the Roman fleet, he commanded vessels stationed at Misenum. He would sail across the bay to investigate this phenomenon, perhaps rescue people if needed. His nephew, 17-year-old Pliny the Younger, begged to come along. The elder Pliny refused. Too dangerous. The boy stayed behind and watched from a distance as his uncle sailed toward the volcano. The elder Pliny never returned. He died that day, one of thousands killed in what would become one of history's most famous natural disasters. But his nephew survived to write the only eyewitness account of what happened when Mount Vesuvius exploded. And because of those letters, because of archaeological excavations that began in 1748, we know more about this single day of horror than perhaps any other day in ancient history. This is the story of the last day of Pompeii. 32 hours of hell. The day when one of the Roman Empire's most prosperous cities was buried alive. Pompeii in 79 AD was a thriving city of about 12,000 people. Located just 5 miles from Mount Vesuvius on Italy's western coast, it sat in one of the most beautiful and fertile regions of the entire Roman Empire. The volcanic soil was perfect for growing grapes and olives. Pompeian wine was famous throughout the empire, served in the finest homes in Rome itself. The city was wealthy. Elegant villas with beautiful gardens lined the streets. Elaborate frescoes decorated the walls. Fountains splashed in courtyards. The Forum, the city's central marketplace and gathering place, was surrounded by temples and government buildings. There was a 20,000-seat amphitheater for gladiatorial games and public spectacles. Public baths where citizens gathered to socialize. Shops and taverns and bakeries. Brothels with explicit paintings advertising their services. It was a cosmopolitan Roman city, full of life and energy. Most residents had no idea they were living on borrowed time. Mount Vesuvius loomed above the city, but it hadn't erupted in living memory. The mountain was green with vegetation. Vines grew on its slopes. It seemed like just another mountain. Nobody knew it was a volcano. The word volcano didn't even exist yet in Latin. It would be coined later, derived from Vulcan, the Roman god of fire. But there had been warnings. 17 years earlier, in 62 AD, a massive earthquake had struck the region. Buildings collapsed. Temples were damaged. The Forum's colonnade was destroyed. The city was still rebuilding when the eruption came. There had been smaller earthquakes in the days leading up to the disaster, but these were common in the region. Nobody thought much of them. The people of Pompeii woke that October morning with no idea it would be their last. They went about their normal routines. Bakers fired their ovens. Shopkeepers opened their stores. A gladiator trainer was working with his fighters at the barracks. A man was having lunch at a tavern. A woman was doing laundry. A dog was chained in a courtyard. All of these details we know because they were frozen in time by what came next. Around noon, perhaps a little earlier, Mount Vesuvius exploded. The mountain had been building pressure for centuries. Magma from deep in the earth had been rising, filling chambers beneath the volcano. Finally, the pressure was too great. The top of the mountain blew apart with a force equivalent to 100,000 atomic bombs. A column of superheated gas, rock and ash shot 20 miles into the sky. The sound was deafening, heard for hundreds of miles. The column spread out at the top, creating that umbrella shape Pliny the Younger saw from across the bay. Within minutes, ash and pumice began raining down on Pompeii. At first, it wasn't immediately deadly. The ash fell like snow, white and gray, covering everything. Pumice stones, light volcanic rock full of air bubbles, pattered on roofs and streets. They were small at first, the size of pebbles. People could brush them off. Some residents decided to evacuate. They gathered valuables and started walking or running away from the city, heading south away from the mountain. But many stayed. They thought it would pass. They'd ride it out. They went inside their homes, closed the doors, waited for it to stop. It was a fatal mistake. The ash and pumice kept falling. Hour after hour. The accumulation grew deeper. 6 inches. A foot. 2 feet. 3 feet. The weight was crushing. Roofs that had already been weakened by the earthquake 17 years earlier began to collapse. People sheltering inside were trapped, buried alive, crushed under the debris. The pumice stones grew larger. By evening, some were the size of fists. They could kill you if they hit your head. The streets became impassable, blocked by drifts of volcanic material. The air was thick with ash, hard to breathe. The sky was black. No sunlight penetrated the cloud. It was darker than the darkest night. Across the bay at Misenum, Pliny the Younger watched in horror. He could see the cloud towering over Vesuvius, lit from within by lightning created by the friction of ash particles. He could see his uncle's ships trying to approach Pompeii but being driven back by falling pumice and the sea conditions. The elder Pliny eventually landed at Stabii, a town south of Pompeii, and took shelter with a friend. At Pompeii, people were panicking. Those who had stayed were now trying to escape, but the streets were blocked. Some tried to dig their way through the ash. Others huddled in their homes, praying to the gods. In one house, a family barricaded themselves in an upper room. A wealthy woman grabbed her jewelry and money. A man clutched his children. At around 7 p.m., 19 hours after the eruption began, the nature of the disaster changed. The eruption column, which had been steadily spewing material into the sky, became unstable. It collapsed. And when it collapsed, it created something far more deadly than falling ash. It created pyroclastic flows. A pyroclastic flow is a fast-moving current of superheated gas and volcanic matter. It can reach temperatures of 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit or more. It moves at speeds up to 450 miles per hour, faster than any human can run, faster than most vehicles can drive. And it destroys everything in its path. The first pyroclastic flow from Vesuvius rushed down the mountain toward the surrounding towns. It didn't reach Pompeii immediately. The city was slightly to the southeast, and the first flow went west. But it devastated other communities. Herculaneum, a wealthy seaside town closer to Vesuvius, was hit by this first surge. People who'd been hiding in boathouses on the beach, waiting for rescue by sea, were killed instantly. Their bodies were vaporized by the heat, their skeletons left behind in positions of agony. For several hours, the pyroclastic flows continued, pulsing down from Vesuvius every 80 minutes or so. Each surge was deadly, but they didn't reach Pompeii. The city was still being buried under ash and pumice, still enduring the falling debris, but the worst was yet to come. At Stabii, where Pliny the Elder had taken shelter, the situation was deteriorating. Ash was falling heavily. The house where he was staying was in danger of being buried. His friends urged him to evacuate by ship. But the seas were too rough, the wind blowing the wrong direction. They were trapped. The elder Pliny, who was overweight and had respiratory problems, struggled to breathe in the ash-choked air. He went to rest on a cloth laid on the ground. He never woke up. The greatest naturalist of the Roman world died that night, suffocated by the volcano he'd tried to study. By dawn the next morning, the eruption had been going on for 19 hours. In Pompeii, those who had survived the night were exhausted, terrified, suffocating. The ash was up to 9 feet deep in some places. Roofs had collapsed. The city was buried. And then came a brief lull. The eruption seemed to ease. The ash stopped falling so heavily. People emerged from wherever they'd been hiding. This was their chance. They had to escape now. Survivors stumbled through the buried streets, climbing over the deep drifts of pumice, trying to get away from the city. Some made it. Archaeologists have found evidence that many Pompeians did escape, relocating to other cities north of Vesuvius. But at 7:07 a.m., just after dawn, the deadliest moment of the entire eruption struck. The eruptive column collapsed again, and this time the resulting pyroclastic flow came directly at Pompeii. It was the largest, hottest, fastest flow of the entire eruption. A wall of superheated gas and volcanic material traveling at over 100 miles per hour, with a temperature of around 570 degrees Fahrenheit. There was no escape. No warning. The surge hit Pompeii in seconds. Everyone still in the city or nearby died instantly. The heat was so intense it caused instant heat shock, killing people before they could even draw another breath. Their bodies went into what's called a pugilistic attitude, the muscles contracting from the heat, pulling the body into a boxer's pose, arms bent, fists clenched. The surge buried them where they fell. More ash followed, more volcanic material, until the entire city was covered. Streets disappeared. Buildings were buried to their rooftops. The forum, the amphitheater, the temples, the homes, all vanished under a blanket of gray volcanic material up to 25 feet deep in places. By 8 p.m. that evening, 32 hours after it began, the eruption finally stopped. Mount Vesuvius went quiet. The massive cloud began to dissipate. And where Pompeii had stood, where 12,000 people had lived and worked and loved and fought, there was nothing. Just a gray wasteland. The death toll was staggering. We don't know exact numbers. At Pompeii, archaeologists have found the remains of over 1,500 people. But the total population was 12,000, and most of those bodies have never been found. Some escaped. Others were completely vaporized by the heat or buried so deeply their remains haven't been located. The conservative estimate is that at least 2,000 died at Pompeii alone. Including Herculaneum and other nearby communities, the total death toll was likely over 16,000 people. Some survivors returned in the weeks and months after the eruption. They dug through the ash looking for valuables, anything they could salvage. The Roman Emperor Titus declared the area an emergency zone and offered financial assistance. But Pompeii was beyond saving. The city was buried too deeply. Eventually, even the location was forgotten. Trees and plants grew over the volcanic soil. Farmers planted vineyards. Life went on, and beneath the ground, Pompeii lay forgotten. For over 1,600 years, the city remained buried. A few times, workers digging wells or foundations hit ancient walls or found coins, but nobody realized what they'd found. It wasn't until 1748 that organized excavations began. An engineer named Roque Joaquin de Alcubierre was hired by King Charles III of Spain, who ruled Naples at the time, to explore the area. What they found was astonishing. An entire Roman city, preserved almost perfectly. The volcanic material that buried Pompeii had sealed it in an airtight tomb. Buildings were intact. Frescoes still showed their vivid colors. Mosaics were undamaged. And most haunting of all were the victims. When archaeologists found cavities in the hardened ash, they realized these were spaces where bodies had decomposed. The ash had formed a mold around the victims. In 1863, an Italian archaeologist named Giuseppe Fiorelli had the idea to pour plaster into these cavities. When the plaster hardened and the ash was chipped away, what remained were plaster casts showing the victims in their final moments. The results were heartbreaking and fascinating. A man pulling his cloak over his face, trying to protect himself from the ash. A dog straining against its chain, twisting in agony. A family huddled together. A gladiator in chains at the barracks. A pregnant woman. Children. The casts captured not just their poses but incredible detail. Facial expressions. The weave of clothing. Shoes. Hair. These people who died nearly 2,000 years ago were suddenly visible again, frozen in their final moments of life. The excavations revealed intimate details about Roman life. In one bakery, they found carbonized loaves of bread still in the oven, preserved by the heat and ash. The loaves had been stamped with the baker's name. In the forum, graffiti on walls showed political slogans, love poems, insults, advertisements. One inscription read, "Lucius Isticidius, I regard as a stranger to good manners who dismissed you so cruelly." Another said Successus, a weaver, loves Iris, an innkeeper. She doesn't care for him. He begs her to take pity. Rivals, go away. In wealthy homes, they found stunning artwork. Frescoes depicting mythological scenes, portraits, landscapes. Mosaics showing everything from fierce dogs with cave canem, beware of dog, written beneath to elaborate scenes of Alexander the Great in battle. The houses revealed how Romans lived, where they cooked, where they slept, how they entertained guests. And there were darker discoveries too. Pompeii had been a city with all the elements of Roman urban life, including prostitution. They found a brothel with small rooms, each with a bed carved from stone. Above each doorway was a painting showing what services were offered inside. It was explicit, unmistakable. Pompeii showed Roman life without censorship, exactly as it had been. The excavations continue to this day. About 2/3 of Pompeii has been uncovered. The rest remains buried, partly because archaeologists want to preserve it for future excavation with better techniques, partly because it's protected by Italian laws. Each new discovery adds to our understanding of the ancient world. In recent years, new technologies have revealed even more. Ground-penetrating radar has shown where structures lie beneath the surface without digging. Chemical analysis of the victims' remains has shown what they ate for their last meals. DNA testing is identifying relationships between victims found together. CT scans of the plaster casts reveal hidden details about injuries and health conditions. One recent discovery found a man and his enslaved servant who died together. The man was wealthy, evidenced by his clothing preserved in the plaster cast. The servant wore simpler clothes. They were found in a corridor, both apparently trying to escape when the pyroclastic flow hit. For centuries, people assumed everyone in Pompeii died equal under the volcano. But even in death, the reality of Roman social hierarchy was preserved. Another excavation found the remains of a horse still in its stable, fully outfitted with an elaborate saddle. It was a wealthy man's horse, left behind when he evacuated. The detail in the plaster cast is so precise you can see the carved decorations on the saddle. They found political campaign posters painted on walls, urging citizens to vote for specific candidates for city positions. They found receipts and accounting records. A thermopolium, an ancient fast food restaurant, with built-in dolia, large jars, for storing hot food. The jars still contained residue of fish, meat, and snails. One establishment had a painting of a duck hanging upside down, apparently advertising what was on the menu. The human stories are endless. In the Garden of the Fugitives, they found 13 people together, apparently a family or group that died trying to escape. They're clustered together, some covering their faces. In the Villa of the Mysteries, outside the city walls, they found some of the most magnificent frescoes in all of Roman art, showing what appears to be a woman being initiated into a mystery cult. They found jewelers with gold still in their shops. A surgeon's house with medical instruments still in place. A fullery, an ancient laundry, with vats for cleaning clothes and graffiti from workers. The level of preservation is unprecedented in archaeology. No other ancient city gives us such a complete picture of daily life. But Pompeii also raises uncomfortable questions about how we remember disaster. For over 250 years, tourists have flocked to see the ruins. The excavations became one of the grand tour destinations in the 18th and 19th centuries. Wealthy Europeans visited to see the frozen city, to marvel at the preservation, to view the plaster casts of the dead. Some critics argue we've turned tragedy into entertainment. These were real people who died horrible deaths. The plaster casts are essentially tombs, showing people in their final moments of agony. And we put them on display for visitors to photograph. In recent years, there's been discussion about treating the casts with more respect, perhaps not displaying them so openly. But others argue that remembering is important. That Pompeii teaches us about the power of nature, about the fragility of civilization. That these victims deserve to be remembered, not forgotten again. That their preservation, however it came about, gives us an irreplaceable window into the ancient world. And there's another reason to study Pompeii. Mount Vesuvius is still an active volcano. It hasn't erupted since 1944, but it will erupt again. Volcanologists know this with certainty. And when it does, over 3 million people now live in the area around Vesuvius. Naples, a city of almost 1 million, sits just 9 miles away. The entire region is one of the most densely populated volcanic areas on Earth. Modern monitoring systems track Vesuvius constantly. Seismometers detect earthquakes. Gas sensors measure emissions from the crater. GPS monitors ground deformation. Scientists have evacuation plans for the entire region. They estimate they'd have about 2 weeks warning before a major eruption, enough time to evacuate most people. But a repeat of the 79 AD eruption would still be catastrophic. The 1944 eruption was much smaller, and it still destroyed several villages. A Plinian eruption, the type that destroyed Pompeii, would be far worse. Even with modern technology, even with warning systems and evacuation plans, thousands could die. The economic damage would be in the hundreds of billions. It would be one of the worst natural disasters in modern history. Pompeii reminds us that nature doesn't care about human civilization. That we build our cities, our lives, our empires on borrowed ground. That a mountain can erase everything in a day. The Romans thought they were invincible. They'd conquered most of the known world. They'd built roads and aqueducts and cities that they believed would last forever. And then a volcano buried one of their cities and killed thousands of people in 32 hours. The story of Pompeii isn't just about ancient history. It's about hubris and humility. It's about living with risk. It's about how we remember tragedy. It's about the impermanence of everything we build. When you walk through Pompeii today, and over 2 million people visit each year, you're walking on streets where Romans walked 2,000 years ago. You can see their homes, their shops, their temples. You can read their graffiti. You can see the ruts worn in stone streets by thousands of cartwheels. You can sit in the amphitheater where they watched gladiators fight. You can stand in the forum where they conducted business and politics. And you can see Mount Vesuvius looming above it all, still there, still silent for now, but waiting. Always waiting. The mountain that destroyed Pompeii hasn't gone anywhere. It's the same volcano, still active, still building pressure. The people who lived in Pompeii didn't know their mountain could kill them. We know. We have the evidence right there in the ruins. But millions of people still live in its shadow anyway. That's the final lesson of Pompeii. Not that disaster is inevitable, but that knowing disaster is possible and choosing to live anyway is part of being human. The Pompeians made that choice, unknowingly. The people of Naples make it knowingly every day. We all make it, in different ways. We all live under our own Vesuvius, whatever that might be for each of us. Pompeii was destroyed in 32 hours. But it's been teaching us lessons for over 250 years. About life, about death, about civilization, about nature, about memory, about courage and fear. About how fragile everything is, and how we carry on anyway. The bodies in plaster, frozen in their final moments, aren't just archaeological specimens. They're people. The man with his cloak over his face had a name, a family, a life. The dog on the chain belonged to someone. The pregnant woman was expecting a child. The family dying together loved each other. They're as real as anyone alive today. They just had the misfortune to be in the wrong place at the wrong time when a mountain exploded. We remember them. We study their city. We try to learn from what happened. And Mount Vesuvius watches over it all, beautiful and deadly, the same mountain that destroyed Pompeii, waiting for the day when it will speak again.